The day had been slow. The kind of gentle slowness that asked for nothing, rushed nowhere, and simply settled around the house like a soft blanket. In the fading light of late afternoon, Evelyn Carter sat in her favorite armchair, the one with deep cushions and fabric worn smooth from years of quiet evenings. She was in her early 70s now, and the chair seemed to understand her better than most people did. Outside her window, sparrows hopped along the garden wall, pecking at invisible crumbs. A breeze tapped lightly at the glass, as if politely requesting entrance. Evelyn breathed in deeply, letting her chest rise and fall with purpose. These small breaths had become grounding points in her day, moments where she reminded herself that she was here, alive, present. She glanced at the clock, a little past 5. Her time, her ritual. With a soft sigh, she pushed herself from the chair. Her knees protested with a creak that matched the floorboards beneath her feet. "I hear you," she murmured to her knees, smiling. "We're getting old together." She walked slowly to the kitchen, where her ivory teapot stood waiting, its once bright blue flowers now faded from years of use. She had boiled the water earlier, as she always did. Routine carried her through the quiet hours. She spooned her favorite tea leaves into the pot. The scent drifted up, warm and comforting, pulling her backward in time, to evenings when Thomas sat across from her. Her husband, her companion of 49 years, gone now for 12. She didn't cry when she thought of him anymore. The grief was no longer sharp. It lived like a gentle echo, a memory that warmed instead of stung. She poured the tea into 2 cups, one for herself, one for him. She carried them to the small wooden table near the window. The sunlight wrapped the cups in a soft golden halo. She didn't speak to the empty cup. She didn't need to. This ritual was the conversation. Evelyn sat down, holding her own warm cup between her palms. The heat seeped into her skin and traveled up her arms, filling the quiet places inside her. For a long moment, she simply sat there, breathing, sipping, existing. The chair across from her was empty, but in her heart it wasn't. It still held the shape of Thomas. She kept his cushion there too, slightly lopsided, slightly worn. Some people would have told her to put it away. But Evelyn didn't believe in erasing the people she loved just because time had changed the shape of her life. She glanced at his cup, still full, untouched, but full of meaning. "Another day," she whispered. "We made it through another day." Evelyn didn't often talk aloud, but in the evenings, when the world quieted and her home felt larger than it truly was, small sentences slipped out. They felt like invitations to presence, to connection, even if no one responded. Loneliness was not new to her. It visited often, sometimes gently, sometimes with weight, but she had learned to greet it the way one greets an old neighbor, politely, calmly, without fear. After a few sips of tea, she reached for the small wooden box on the nearby shelf. The box was hand-carved. Thomas had made it decades ago as an anniversary gift. Its surface was worn smooth by years of fingertips brushing across it. Inside were letters. Letters from seasons of their life. Youthful years, hard years, joyful years. Letters they wrote when words came easier on paper than aloud. Every night, Evelyn chose one letter. Not in order, not with planning.
she simply let her fingers guide her. Tonight, her fingertips stopped on a pale yellow envelope. It was from his final months, one of the letters he wrote when he could no longer speak much. Her chest tightened, not with pain, but with tenderness. Evelyn unfolded the paper carefully. His handwriting, though weaker than before, was still unmistakably his. She read aloud in a soft whisper, "My Evelyn, if you're reading this, I want you to remember something. We lived well. We loved well. And you must keep living, even when I cannot sit across from you."
She paused, taking a slow, steady breath. "Promise me you'll keep finding small joys. Promise you'll keep making tea, taking slow walks, watching sunlight through the curtains. Promise you'll stay gentle with yourself." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She continued, "If loneliness visits you, don't push it away. Sit with it for a moment. You were always brave enough to feel deeply. But when you can, open a window. Let fresh air remind you that life still has moments waiting for you." She pressed the letter to her chest for a quiet moment. "Thank you," she whispered. The room seemed to hold her gently, like an old friend easing into the space. She folded the letter, returning it to the box, and took another small sip of tea. Outside, the sky shifted into lavender tones, fading into deeper shades of evening. The first star blinked awake. Evelyn watched the horizon with calm eyes, letting the peace settle around her like soft fabric. She rested back in her chair, her body relaxed, her breath softened. Yes, she lived alone. Yes, the evenings stretched long. But moments like this reminded her she still belonged to something, to memory, to love, to the gentle unfolding of life. As night draped itself across the sky, Evelyn let her eyes grow heavy. Her heart felt full, not with sorrow, but with presence. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "we'll try again." 2 cups sat on the table, one full, one empty, side by side. A ritual, a remembrance, a promise that love, in its quiet way, never leaves. Morning arrived quietly for Evelyn, the way it often did. Soft light stretching across her bedroom walls, touching them gently, as if waking an old friend. She blinked awake slowly, letting her eyes adjust to the pale golden brightness. It had been years since she needed an alarm clock. Her body woke when it was ready, guided by rhythms shaped more by peace than by urgency. She lay still for a moment, listening to the birds outside. Their soft chirping sounded like a morning greeting, a reminder that the world continued its gentle beating. With a deep breath, she pushed herself up, letting her feet find the soft rug beside the bed. "One more morning," she whispered to herself. "We're here." She slipped on her cozy slippers, the ones with faded stitching along the sides. They had molded perfectly to her feet over the years, becoming a small but steady comfort. The house felt cool as she walked into the kitchen. The kettle waited on the counter, still holding the memory of last night's ritual. She filled it again, placing it quietly on the stove. As the water heated, she prepared her morning tea. She didn't use the 2-cup ritual in the mornings. That belonged to the evenings. The mornings were for grounding herself, reminding her that she was still part of the living world.
She opened the window, letting in a breath of fresh air. The breeze carried the scent of early dew, a smell that always made her feel more awake, more connected. Evelyn took her tea to the small round table near the kitchen window. Sunlight streamed in through the glass, stretching across her hands as she wrapped them around the warm cup. For a moment, she simply sat, breathing in the steam, letting warmth spread through her chest. This was her favorite part of the morning, the quiet. The world hadn't begun its daily noise yet, and the silence didn't feel heavy here. It felt spacious, like a gentle invitation. "Maybe I'll walk today," she murmured to herself, sipping slowly. The idea felt right. Thomas had always loved their morning walks. After he passed, she found herself avoiding the path they used to take. But over the years, the ache softened, and the memories began to feel like companions, not wounds. She finished her tea, washed the cup carefully, and prepared herself for the day. A light cardigan, comfortable walking shoes, a small cloth bag she always took on her walks. When she stepped outside, the sunlight greeted her with warmth that seeped into her shoulders. The neighborhood was peaceful, an older community where most people her age had settled into similar quiet lives. Some homes were empty now, their former owners having moved or passed on. Others still held families, children who visited only on weekends or holidays. Evelyn walked slowly down the familiar street, taking her time. She no longer rushed. Rushing, she had learned, was for younger years. The pavement felt cool beneath her shoes. The trees lining the sidewalks rustled softly. A cat stretched lazily on someone's porch, its fur glowing under the morning sun. She turned onto the small path leading toward the hill at the edge of town. This was the path she and Thomas walked countless times. At first, after he died, she avoided it, afraid the memories would be too much. But one day, she gathered her courage and returned, discovering that the path held comfort she didn't expect. She walked slowly, savoring every step, noticing tiny details she once took for granted, the way small patches of wildflowers grew along the path, the sound of distant wind chimes from a nearby house, the gentle hum of life continuing. After 15 minutes, she reached the large oak tree, their oak tree. It stood tall and steady, its branches stretching like open arms, welcoming her home. Beneath it, the ground was covered in leaves, some crisp, some soft, forming a natural blanket of changing seasons. Evelyn walked a little closer to the trunk and placed her palm against the rough bark. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "Hello, my love," she whispered. When she opened her eyes, she reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a small folded paper. She unfolded it gently, a list Thomas had made years ago, titled Small Joys. He had written it on a random Tuesday morning after one of their walks. She had always kept it with her. It read, "Fresh morning air. A walk with Evelyn. The smell of tea leaves. Birds singing. The way sunlight dances on the kitchen floor. Quiet moments. Holding hands. Knowing you're alive."
Evelyn smiled. You always knew how to make simple things feel important. She sat beneath the oak tree, leaning her back against its sturdy trunk. The bark pressed into her gently, supporting her. The breeze brushed lightly against her cheeks.
She closed her eyes and allowed herself to drift, not into sleep, but into memories. She remembered their early walks when they were young and walked faster, laughing about city things. She remembered the years when their pace slowed, but their togetherness deepened. She remembered how Thomas always found something beautiful to point out. A bird, a leaf, a cloud, a joke. Life's best moments, he used to say, are the quiet ones, the ones so small most people walk right past them. Evelyn placed the list of small joys in her lap. She thought about how loneliness often tried to convince older people that life's beautiful moments were behind them, but she had learned slowly that small joys don't retire, they don't age, they simply wait to be noticed. A gentle rustling sound caught her attention. A man walked up the path, a neighbor she recognized from distant greetings. His name was Arthur, a widower in his late 60s. He paused, smiling politely when he saw her. "Beautiful morning," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "It is." He gestured toward the oak tree. "Mind if I sit?" "Not at all," she said. He lowered himself to the grass with a groan. "These old bones," he muttered. Evelyn chuckled. "They like to complain." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Arthur looked up at the branches. "My wife loved this tree," he said. "We used to come here for picnics." Evelyn nodded. "My husband and I, too." Their eyes met in mutual understanding. Two souls carrying similar stories, similar losses. Arthur sighed softly. "Sometimes I think the memories are too heavy to carry alone." Evelyn turned her head slightly. "They feel heavy," she said gently, "because we carry the love too. But sharing small pieces of it helps, even if just for a moment." Arthur nodded slowly. The breeze rustled the leaves above them again, almost as if the tree itself approved. After a while, Arthur stood with effort. "And I should keep walking before I stiffen up completely." Evelyn smiled. "Take care." He nodded, and as he walked away, she realized something. The world still held little threads of connection. You just had to allow them in. She stayed beneath the tree a little longer, feeling the ground beneath her, listening to the wind, watching the slow drift of clouds overhead. "Thank you," she whispered to the oak, "for homing our memories." Finally she rose, brushed leaves from her cardigan, and started her journey back home. Each step felt lighter than when she arrived. The sun warmed her back. She could almost imagine Thomas walking beside her, not as a ghost, but as a memory woven into the rhythm of her steps. When she reached her front door, she paused, placing a hand over her heart. "Yes," she whispered, "life still has small joys." Evelyn stepped inside, letting the quiet house welcome her once more. The afternoon sun rested gently on the living room floor, stretching in warm golden lines across the old patterned rug. Evelyn stood at the bookshelf, her fingers brushing lightly over the spines of books she'd collected over decades. Some were gifts, some were travel treasures, some were remnants of evenings curled side by side with Thomas, reading quietly in shared silence. She paused, letting her hand rest on a small stack of old notebooks, the journals she'd kept from her 20s all the way into her 70s. She smiled faintly. "You've seen a lot of life with me," she whispered to them. It had been a long time since she opened them, not because she didn't want to revisit her past, but because she had been afraid that reading old hopes would make her current life feel too quiet, too empty. But today she felt strong enough, or maybe gentle enough. She carried the journals to her armchair and sat down slowly, settling into the familiar embrace of the cushions. Outside, a sparrow hopped onto the windowsill, peering in with curious eyes. Evelyn smiled at the tiny visitor. She opened the first notebook. The paper had yellowed slightly, and her handwriting, much neater back then, filled the pages with looping letters and earnest words. The first entry was from 1969. I met a man today. His name is Thomas. He has kind eyes, the kind that listen before he speaks. Evelyn let out a soft laugh, the sound low and warm. You really did notice his eyes first, she whispered. She turned the page, reading bits and pieces of her younger self's thoughts, small worries, big dreams, simple joys. She read about days spent in parks, evenings filled with laughter, the nervous excitement before their wedding, the comfort of building a home together. As she flipped through the pages, the years moved quickly, like a soft breeze carrying echoes of countless moments. Entries from their middle years spoke of small triumphs, small arguments, grocery lists, garden updates, recipes she had loved and forgotten. Life written in the small handwriting of daily moments. Eventually, she reached the journals from the years after Thomas passed. These pages were different. The handwriting shakier, the words fewer, the tone heavier. She read an entry. It's been 4 weeks. I still make 2 cups of tea. I can't stop. I think if I stop, I'll lose him twice. Another page. I sat by the oak tree today. I cried, but the wind felt like a hand on my back. And then, the loneliness is loud tonight. I hope it softens soon. Evelyn closed the journal gently, placing her hand on the cover. She didn't feel that same sharp loneliness anymore. It had softened, like fabric born from years of holding on. She leaned back in her chair, letting her eyes drift closed for a moment. The room felt still, peaceful, a home that carried her stories gently. She opened her eyes again when she remembered something Thomas had always encouraged her to do. Focus on the little moments, he used to say. The small things are where life hides its meaning. With a quiet chuckle, she stood up and walked toward the kitchen. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small spiral notebook, her Little Moments book. She began it after Thomas passed, trying to find daily reasons to stay connected to life. She opened it. Warm sunlight on my face. The smell of cinnamon. A neighbor's smile. Birdsong in the morning. Remembering a happy memory without crying. She added a new one. Sitting under the oak tree with Arthur nearby. She paused after writing his name. He was kind, quiet, gentle. Someone who understood loss. Someone who didn't fill silence with noise. And she realized how rare that was. Evelyn closed the notebook and set it aside. The house felt cozy, but she knew staying home all day would make her feel too still, too settled. Movement, even slow movement, was good for her heart. She slipped on her shoes and stepped outside again. The air had warmed since morning, carrying a faint floral scent from gardens along the street. She walked slowly, letting her gaze wander. She always tried to notice at least one new thing each day, something she hadn't fully appreciated before. Today, it was the mailbox near Mrs. Dalton's house, painted with tiny hand-drawn flowers she had never paid attention to. She continued down the street and stopped in front of the small community library. It wasn't large, but it had tall windows and a kind old sign that read, "Stories live here." She pushed the door open quietly. Inside, the familiar smell of books, paper, ink, memories wrapped around her like a warm scarf. The librarian, a middle-aged woman named Hannah, smiled when she saw Evelyn. Good afternoon, dear. Looking for anything special today? Evelyn shook her head gently. Just wandering, she said. Wandering is good for the soul, Hannah replied. Evelyn browsed through the shelves, running her fingers along book spines. She wasn't looking for anything new. Sometimes she came here simply to feel surrounded by stories. She paused in front of the local history section. A strong wave of nostalgia rolled in. She and Thomas used to volunteer here on weekends long ago, organizing shelves and reading to children. She smiled. We made good memories here, she whispered. She chose a poetry book, thin, easy to carry, and made her way to the reading corner. A couple of older folks sat nearby, one knitting, the other dozing softly. Evelyn opened a book to a random page. The poem was about seasons changing, about how each leaf knows when it's time to fall. She read quietly, "There is beauty in letting go, and tenderness in all that stays." Her eyes softened. "So true," she murmured. After a little while, she returned the book, thanked Hannah, and stepped back outside. The evening light was beginning to settle over the town. Birds called to each other, and the wind carried a soft rustling through the trees. As she walked home, she thought about something she rarely admitted aloud. Even though she lived alone, she didn't feel as alone as she once had. Some days were still harder than others, but she had begun building a life that held her gently, through small rituals, small joys, small connections. When she reached her home, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The quiet greeted her, but it no longer felt like a void. It felt like space. She placed her cardigan over the back of the chair and took a slow breath. The shadows in the room were soft now, stretching with the beginning of dusk. It was almost time for her evening ritual again. 2 cups, warm tea, a moment of remembrance. But before that, she felt a desire to write something new, something she hadn't written in years. She picked up a pen, opened a fresh page in her journal, and wrote, "I'm learning to live again, not the same way as before, but in small, meaningful ways that fit who I am now." She paused, then added, "Loneliness still visits, but it doesn't stay as long. I'm building a life where memories and present moments can sit side by side." She closed the journal gently, letting her hand rest on the cover. Evelyn walked to the kitchen, filling the kettle once more. As the water warmed, she pulled down 2 teacups and whispered, "Another day, my love. Another day filled with little moments." The ritual would continue. The memories would stay, and so would she, living, noticing, trying, one quiet day at a time. The light of late afternoon softened as Margaret returned home from the lakeside path. The sky had shifted into muted peach and lavender tones, the kind that felt gentle on tired eyes. She placed her hand on the doorframe before stepping inside, inhaling deeply, feeling an unexpected sense of warmth settle in her chest. The house greeted her, not with silence, but with a kind of welcoming stillness, the kind built slowly over years, shaped by familiar objects, memories, and her own quiet rituals. She placed her scarf on the hook by the door and took a moment to savor the simple comfort of returning to a place that held so much of her life. She filled the kettle and set it to boil, the low hum becoming part of the evening's rhythm. While she waited, she looked out the kitchen window. The old maple tree stood steady, its branches barely moving in the soft breeze. It reminded her of someone standing guard, steady through the seasons. When the water was ready, she made a cup of chamomile and carried it into the living room. She placed the cup on the small wooden table right beside the framed photograph of Robert, smiling warmly, his eyes full of patience and affection. She touched the edge of the frame gently.
She spoke to him the way she had learned to over time, not expecting answers, not imagining voices, just sharing space with someone she still loved deeply. "Do you remember the lantern you gave me?" she whispered. "The one I still light for you." Her gaze drifted to the hallway shelf where the lantern sat. It was simple, metal frame, glass sides slightly fogged with age. Lighting it had become one of her rituals, a quiet act that reminded her she was not walking through life alone, even if her days sometimes felt that way. She lifted the lantern carefully and set it on the small table near her armchair. As she lit the candle inside, the flame flickered softly, casting warm circles of light across the room. Shadows stretched and curled on the walls like slow-moving brushstrokes. The gentle glow made the room feel smaller in a comforting way, almost like the lantern gathered all her memories and held them close. She sat down and let her shoulders relax, breathing in the soft scent of wax and old wood. Tonight, her ritual carried something new, a sense of readiness, as if the day's reflections had opened a quiet door inside her. She reached for the small box of keepsakes she hadn't touched in a long while. The box was wooden, carved with delicate vines Robert once said reminded him of the way she used to braid her hair. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside were letters, dried flowers, ticket stubs, and tiny objects that once felt too precious to leave exposed. Items that had belonged not only to Robert, but also to moments of her own life she had tucked away, sometimes out of love, sometimes out of longing, sometimes out of fear of remembering too clearly. She unfolded the top letter. The paper had yellowed slightly, the ink softened with time. The words were Robert's, written during their early years together. "I hope you always keep the little rituals that bring you joy," it read, "even when life gets quieter." She felt her throat tighten, but not painfully. It was the kind of ache that comes from being understood, even across the distance of years. She pressed the letter to her chest for a moment, letting the memory settle around her like a shawl. A warmth spread through her, not from the candle, but from the clear realization that she had kept her rituals. She had tended her little joys. She had lived with intention, even on days when loneliness fell heavy. She placed the letter gently beside her and reached for a small bundle of dried lavender wrapped in thread. The scent rose lightly as she brought it closer. She remembered how she and Robert used to hang lavender near the window, letting the sunlight warm it until the fragrance filled the whole room. The lantern's glow illuminated her hands as she stroked the brittle stems. She realized something quietly profound, that rituals were not just ways of remembering the past, they were ways of caring for the present version of herself. She reached into the box again and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. It was an old handkerchief embroidered with tiny blue flowers. Her mother had stitched it for her when she was young, telling her that even small handmade things carried love that never faded. Margaret placed the handkerchief over her knee and smoothed its edges, tracing the delicate stitching. She thought of how often people forget the weight of gentleness, the power of small acts done with intention. The room settled deeper into evening as she continued exploring the box, memories drifting like quiet ripples. Each object brought a different kind of comfort. Some reminded her of laughter, some of tears, some of dreams that had shifted but still lived in subtle corners of her heart. Yet she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt accompanied, supported, as if each memory had been waiting patiently to return, not to haunt her, but to remind her she had lived a full, layered, meaningful life. Margaret leaned back in her chair and sipped her tea, which had cooled to a soothing warmth.
She listened to the subtle sounds of the evening, the distant hum of a car, the faint chirp of a night bird, the whisper of wind brushing past the window. She wasn't alone in the way she once feared. Loneliness still visited her, but it no longer defined her days. Rituals, memories, and gentle actions anchored her. They connected her not only to the past, but to the present moment, to herself. The lantern flickered softly, casting a warm halo around her chair. She allowed herself to imagine Robert sitting across from her, smiling in that easy, steady way he always had. She didn't try to hold on to the image. She simply let it drift in and out like a soft tide. She closed the box of keepsakes gently and placed it beside her chair. Not put away, not hidden, just close enough to reach again when needed. She sat quietly for a long while, watching the lantern's glow deepen as the sky outside turned darker. In the stillness, she felt a peaceful fullness in her chest, a recognition. She was allowed to rest inside her memories, but she was also allowed to build new rituals, new meaning, new comfort. Her eyes grew heavy with the gentle weight of approaching sleep. She whispered, "Thank you for the light you still bring." And the lantern flickered as if in response. The evening settled around her, warm and embracing, and as the candle continued its slow dance within the lantern, Margaret let herself drift into a soft, reflective calm, ready for the quiet unfolding of tomorrow. The night had grown deep and quiet, the world outside Margaret's home wrapped in soft darkness. The gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of an owl filled the air. Inside, the lantern glowed warmly on the table, casting soft circles of light around the room. Margaret settled into her chair, a small notebook in her lap and a cup of tea warming her hands. She exhaled slowly, letting the day's thoughts drift like leaves in a gentle stream. Today had been filled with small moments, moments she might have overlooked years ago. A smile from a neighbor, the way the light fell through the window, the quiet companionship of her own breath. She realized with gentle clarity that presence itself could be a form of love. Love for life, for memory, for herself. She opened her notebook and began writing, letting her thoughts flow without judgment. I noticed the light on the kitchen floor. I noticed the wind brushing through the trees. I noticed the warmth of this cup in my hands. These small things are not small at all. They are proof that life continues, quietly, beautifully, insistently. Margaret paused to take a sip of her tea. The warmth traveled from her hands to her chest, and she felt a sense of grounded calm. Memories of her loved ones, the joys and griefs of the past, and the rhythm of the present all mingled gently. She thought about Thomas and her late parents, about friends who had moved away, and about neighbors who only sometimes lingered long enough for conversation. Loneliness could visit, but she no longer feared it. She had learned to welcome it, to sit quietly with it, and in doing so, she discovered patience, understanding, and gentle acceptance. Her gaze fell on the stack of letters beside her. Letters from decades of life, sent and received, kept and treasured. She picked up one from Thomas and read it softly. Even when I am not there, know that love continues in small, careful ways. Keep noticing, keep breathing, keep living. She set the letter down, and looked around the room, at the objects that held memory and meaning. Each item was a touchstone, a small piece of connection to the past and to the essence of life itself. The teacup, the lantern, the handkerchief, all reminders that presence, ritual, and care were forms of continuity. Margaret leaned back and closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift. She reflected on the subtle lessons life had offered over the years, that grief and joy could coexist, that solitude could teach resilience, and that daily actions, making tea, lighting a candle, walking under trees, could hold profound meaning. She imagined her younger self, worried about loneliness, unsure about aging, and she imagined her present self, patient, mindful, embracing life's small gifts. The bridge between the two selves was simple: presence, mindful attention to the small, everyday moments that often went unnoticed. Margaret rose and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the stars shimmered, delicate and steady. The moon cast a gentle light across the garden, and she felt the invisible pulse of life all around her. The breeze in the leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the quiet hum of the world at rest. She opened the window and let the cool night air brush her face. "Thank you," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for all the memories, the love, the small joys, and even the hardships that had taught her resilience. Returning to her chair, she picked up her notebook again. She wrote a new entry. "I am learning that being alone does not mean being empty. There is fullness in memory, in small acts of care, in noticing. I am never truly alone when I am present. Life, in its quiet way, is always near me." She set the notebook down, sipped her tea, and let the warmth of the moment spread through her body. She felt connected to the continuum of her life, past, present, and the gentle unfolding of tomorrow. The rhythm of her breath, the candle's soft glow, the quiet sounds of her home, all of it felt like a tender embrace. Finally, she reached for the lantern one last time that evening. She tilted it slightly, letting the flame flicker as shadows danced across the walls. She felt a profound sense of presence, a deep gratitude, and a subtle hope. Not hope for grand events, but for the beauty in small, steady moments. Margaret leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes fully. She let the quiet wrap around her, listening to the rhythm of her own heart, the echo of cherished voices, the whisper of life continuing outside. And she understood, finally, that living fully was not about constant excitement or achievement. It was about noticing, embracing, being. In the comfort of her home, surrounded by memories, objects of love, and the gentle pulse of the world outside, Margaret felt a quiet completeness. She was not lonely. She was not lost. She was here, alive, present. As her eyelids grew heavy, she whispered to herself once more, "Tomorrow will come, and I will meet it with small joys, with memories, with care, and with love." The candle flickered, the lantern cast a final warm glow, and Margaret drifted into sleep, cradled by the comfort of a life lived fully, tenderly, and mindfully.